Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about automated testing and code reviews. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, can automated testing replace code reviews? If you work alone, then you don't have code reviews usually. And it's good to think, I think, about more to think about code reviews and testing and so forth as different approaches to approaching a problem that can never be truly solved. Let me explain this a little bit. So this is a pro tip for the boys and girls out there who wants to make a swing at getting into testing and things like that. And usually this becomes increasingly more valuable as the more senior you get, or like the more complicated the role that you're going to take on. So we have a concept we call the testing pyramid. It's an old it's basically just it's an old mental model that may not always be completely correct. But the basic idea behind it is that at the bottom of the pyramid you have a foundation layer of unit tests. And then you usually have, it can be different heights, but usually you have integration tests, and then you might have end-to-end tests at the very top. The reason why we segment it in this manner is because we have a layered approach to figuring out whether or not the system is working. And the reason why we layer it like this is because if you skip, say, unit tests, then you would have to test all possible combinations of logic at, say, the top of the pyramid, where we would do end-to-end testing. That's basically, it's in essence, you could do call that manual testing as well. I mean, you do this automatically, but it's the same deal. So if you think about that conceptually, if you were to go to any website and try to figure out if that system is working by just interacting with the system, there is very little that you could do in order to figure that out in a complicated system, because all the different functions and services and databases, I mean, just looking at like this, like YouTube or whatever, like, guys, the website that you are looking at right now most likely has hundreds of components, millions of lines of code. And if you were to try to see if all that is working by just clicking at it, that's going to it's basically going to be impossible, because you're simply at too high of an abstraction level to figure out if all the nitty-gritty little details is working as well. What you can do is what the end-to-end test basically do is just to see, does the appearance of what's happening, is that working? So for example, if you could, in theory, create a test that basically just clicked a button, for example, and went to all the different databases, all the different logs, and all the different places where something should happen, and then verifies that the correct thing is happening, then you could start doing something like that. These tests become very, very heavy. So why we segment it is because if we go lower, if we go down to the bottom layer where we have unit testing, what we're doing is that we're trying to say, all right, I might not be able to test all the different parts that makes up this logic, that is correct at the top level of this pyramid, but I can test every individual piece, because if I can make sure that each individual piece is working correctly, then when they are all working correctly, then I can take it up a notch and start testing if the interactions between these different components is working as expected, right? And so a code review is just another approach to making sure that the system works. Now, the problem with the code review is that you can't, that's why you can't say that one is going to replace the other, because the automated test, for example, is just there to make sure that the code is working. So if you write a classic one is that quite a lot of developers don't actually write tests, especially not for smaller systems. And for a lot of people that might not make a lot of sense, because if you write a Hello World application or like console log something, you don't really have to test that, because you know that it's going to work. And the same thing is true with code reviews. If you work alone, for example, you don't have code reviews, because you have no peers. Like, you're working completely alone, and you will not be able to spot whether or not you created like a bad solution or did something in a poor way or so forth, because you're blind to your own mistakes, if that makes sense. So an automated test is a way for you to make sure that you create your test cases, and then basically that tells you if you made a coding mistake. if something logically is not working with your code, assuming now that you can write a good test. But the code review is for some other developer to tell you, to help you understand whether or not this code is readable, is it comprehensible, does it follow like the overall. The classic one is maybe you're a junior software developer and you're going to contribute code to a bigger project, and you might have a tech lead or someone who's more experienced, and there's some type of architecture or practice or something like that that you need to follow. They can give you feedback on if this code that you're writing fits into that overall context. You can also learn from code reviews and so forth and so forth. So code reviews are not really intended to replace automated testing. You can think of them as just being a part of this testing pyramid. It's just another layer of practices and rituals, or we can call it rituals, that we apply to the software delivery process to make sure that the code, number one, works, and number two, that it continues being maintainable over time. Because the unit test, they will only tell you, if you write them correctly, that the system is working based on what you're testing for. The code review helps you make sure that the code stays maintainable and comprehensible to the software developers. That is the intention. There's not really, I mean, there are tools that have, like, you know, they give you metrics on how complicated your code and so forth is, which absolutely you can use tools like that, but I've found that it's very difficult for those sorts of things to actually help you with the overall coding styles, because you can actually write code in many ways and have it quote unquote be correct, which is what legacy systems are basically all about. You might have created something that quote unquote works, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it does it well, and it doesn't mean that it's written in a way which, you know, you can start scaling on and add new functionality. Because as your system grows, you will find that if you write software poorly, even if the tests are passing, you find it's going to be more and more difficult for you to actually deliver the next set of features, because the style that you use when you write code and whether or not you use the right abstractions and you model things correctly is going to determine quite a lot of, more so basically, because the tests are just there to check correctness, but how the thing works, that's the thing that is going to be determined mostly in the code review, because the style and architecture is affected more by the code review than anything else. So what I want you to take away from this is that you could, in theory, I mean, you don't have, not everybody has a code review, guys. Some people work alone and some people work in teams where they don't really care so much and so forth. And that doesn't mean that the code is going to be automatically bad, but it's the same thing with unit testing. You can skip writing unit tests for your system. It's more a question of at what point do you need it. Maybe you're super smart and you never have to write any tests. That's very unlikely, because software development inevitably becomes so complicated that it's very difficult for you to actually check accuracy and these sorts of things without some type of automated testing in place. And that's where we talk about the testing pyramid, that you have different strategies for dealing with bugs or issues at different levels. And a code review is just another way of dealing with the same sort of issue. It's just a part of the quality process. You can skip it, but that has an impact as well. Just as you can, some companies don't use end-to-end testing, for example. They just do unit testing and say integration testing because it's flaky. A classic one is it's flaky, which it is, to be fair. If you do like UI-based testing where like things run, you run a bot basically through the different test cases, it's always a case where something might just flake out on you, or like the test is going to fail for no reason. And if you have a lot of them, that's going to happen all the time. And so some companies don't do that. That's a trade-off, but it's really just down to risk management and what risk do you want to take on. If you don't have code reviews, the risk is that the code turns out to be poorly it might have a bad architecture, or it might not be comprehensible to other people, making it more difficult to add new features, things like that. If you don't do testing, you might have a lot of logical bugs or like regressions as soon as you change something within the code. So it's not a question of replacing one or the other, it's just different approaches to making sure that the system works and that it continues working when other people interact with it. Have a great day.